o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central, so I'll call the meeting to order. I want to welcome everyone to our first meeting of our TISA Review Committee. I'm Bob Eby, and I know most of you on this call. I represent the 3rd Congressional District on the State Board of Education, and I serve as its chairman. And by serving as a chairman, I also serve as the chairman of the TISA Review Committee. What I'd like to do before we go around the room and get introductions is to ask Nathan of our staff to call roll so we all know who's here. Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Michelle Simcox.
Here.
Representative Mark White.
Carly Bowers sitting in for Representative Mark White.
David Connor. David Connor is confirmed, so kind of expecting he'll be coming on. Senator White, we got Jessica Bryant.
Yes, Jessica for Senator White.
Great. Ben Torres.
Here.
Eddie Pruitt.
Here.
Eddie's on. Ron McPherson. Ron McPherson. He also was confirmed. Dr. Sarah Morrison.
You're here. Good to see everybody.
Yay. Crystal Nelson.
Present, thank you.
So we got Marianne Dursky for Commissioner Reynolds.
Present.
Greg Turner for Commissioner Bryson.
Here.
Dr. Cliff Lippard.
Hey, I'm here.
Very good. Marlon Davis. Jim. Chairman Eby. Vice Chairman Darrell Cobbins.
No, he's planning on joining.
Yeah. Let's see. He says he's logging in right now. Let's try Pam Jones with Lebanon Special. Pam. Okay. Comptroller Mumpower.
For Comptroller Mumpower.
Give me the first name again.
See our video. Lance Iverson.
Oh, okay. Great.
For Comptroller Mumpower.
And all right. Kathy Cobb. Gary Lilly. I just saw
here.
There he is. Yeah. Chris McCart, he's the city manager at Kingsport, represents the municipal league. He called me earlier today and sends his regrets that he's unable to join. Jessica Himes, the House Budget Director.
I'm here.
Great.
I'm here.
Great. So Troy Kilzer, is he on? Director of Schools over in Chester.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, sir. Good. Jeannie Phillips.
I'm here.
Great. And Bob Nardo.
Present.
Very good. Now, Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, sir. First, I want to thank everyone for your time for serving on this committee. We're going to be engaged in some very critical work. We're the body that make recommendations about the funding formula, and we can set priorities. Today, we'll hear about the legal framework under which we work, the process to create those frameworks, and learn about the formula itself and the fiscal capacities today. By law, we're required to meet at least 4 times per year. I think we'll have 4 meetings that we know of, ending late in the year around the November time period, from which we will provide a report to the governor and to the finance administration and eventually to the legislature. I want to go around the room and have each member to just less than 30 seconds each, and I'll give you an example. Just basically state who you are, what your position is, and how your work is related to the formula and the children that it serves. So I will start. Again, I'm Bob Eby. I'm the chairman of the Tennessee State Board of Education. And on the state board, we set the rules and the policies associated with this TISA funding. Let me go to Michelle Simcox first.
Hi, I'm Michelle Simcox. I'm the Director of Schools in Johnson County, Tennessee, and I ensure that our TISA data is correct because it impacts my budget, which is really important.
Very good. Welcome, Michelle. Carly Bowers for Representative Mark White.
Good afternoon. My name is Carly Bowers. I am Chairman Mark White's research analyst. And of course, he is the chair of the House Education Committee. And then there are 4 subcommittees under that. So just happy to be here and sitting in for him.
Thank you, Carly. David Connor.
It's David Connor on behalf of the Tennessee County Services Associations. I represent the county governments in Tennessee as local funding partners for the state of Tennessee.
Excellent. Welcome, David. Jessica Bryant for Senator Don White.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Bryant. I'm the research analyst for the Senate Education Committee and work with Senator Don White, who's the chairman of the committee.
Thank you, Jessica. Ben Torres.
Ben Torres with the Tennessee School Boards Association. We work directly with school districts, superintendents across the state on policy and planning, strategic planning, and any other questions they have.
Thanks, Ben. Welcome. Eddie Pruitt.
Eddie Pruitt, Director of Schools for Gibson County Special School District. And I'm glad that this group has some superintendents on it to help people understand how we use that to fund our districts.
Very good. Thank you, Eddie. Did Ron McPherson join? If not, Dr. Sarah Morrison.
Good afternoon. Yes, Sarah Morrison. I'm the executive director at the State Board of Education. Work closely with our chairman. So like he said, I support our board. I'm not a voting member of our board, but certainly the TISA rules has been an important piece of regulation that's come through our board, and any changes to those rules subsequently will come to our board. So definitely have an invested interest in getting the money part right in terms of serving students across our state.
Sorry,
Thank you, Sarah.
I'll jump in. Ron McPherson here. Sorry about that. Having a little bit of technical difficulties. I'm a little bit late jumping on, so apologize for that.
Well, can you just give us 20 seconds of your role and how you fit into
Sure.
this? And Ron, glad you joined.
Oh, absolutely. I'm CFO, Knox County Schools. I don't know if I'm the only rookie here or not, but anyway, really looking forward to working with the committee and maybe sharing some thoughts and maybe some questions, quite a bit of questions we have, and hoping we can shape TISA in a way that can benefit all districts across the state.
Great. Thank you, Ron. Crystal Nelson.
Yes, Crystal Nelson with Overton County Board of Education, and I work on behalf of Understanding Learning, the TISA formula every year. I love to know more about it, so I'm happy to be here and support any way I can for the schools.
Thanks, Crystal. I guess Mary Ann Dursky's in for Lizette Reynolds.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I represent Commissioner Reynolds, who, as Commissioner of Education, is intimately involved with the TISA formula and ensuring that it provides the necessary funding and supports to meet the needs of all of our students across the state.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Greg Turner in for Jim Bryson, Commissioner Bryson.
Yeah, Greg Turner, Budget Office, and I work with Mary Ann and the Department of Education in creating and then ultimately submitting their budget requests to the legislature each year.
Thank you, Greg. Cliff Lippard.
Yeah, hi, I'm Cliff Lippard. I'm the executive director of the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, or TASER. We calculate 1/2 of the formula used for the fiscal capacity formula, which is the portion of TISA that determines the local share for funding.
Thank you, Cliff. We'll hear from you later, too. Marlon Davis, did he join?
I believe I saw him.
All right. Vice Chair Darrell Cobbins. Did you see him?
Good afternoon.
Yeah, Marlon's on.
Vice Chair, State Board of Education, glad to be here with you all. About a month ago, we conducted accountability hearings for districts across the state that were considered low performing, and part of that was related to the TISA legislation and the additional funding that has come from the legislature to districts. And so it's the first time we had done that as a state. And we learned a lot and have a lot to share as part of this discussion relative to that. So let's have a great day.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cobbins. And if you haven't seen any of the videos of the TISA accountability hearings, I'd recommend you go back and look at one or two. I think they were very helpful and beneficial. Did you say Marlon Davis was on, Nathan?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Oh, there you go.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was muted there. So I'm Marlon Davis, Executive Director of TSSE, which is Tennessee School Systems for Equity, and our organization represents about 85 to 90 school systems. We assist them with some fiscal issues they may be having.
Welcome, Marlon. Pam Jones. Is Pam Jones on? I think she was on. Oh,
No, I don't think so.
okay, guess not. Let's see. Jason Mumpower's not on, but I didn't get the name of the person sitting
Lance
in for him.
Iverson.
Lance
Hello,
Iverson.
I'm Lance Iverson. I'm a fiscal analyst for the Comptroller of the Treasury's Research Office, and I'm representing Comptroller Mumpower today.
Thank you, Lance. Gary Lilly.
Good afternoon. I'm Gary Lilly, the Executive Director of the Tennessee Organization of School Superintendents, aka TOS, and we support public school superintendents and public school students across the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Chris McCart is absent.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. We were actually we have been joined by Pam Jones. She is on. Came on after the roll call. So
Pam Jones. Miss Jones, can you either unmute or we'll get back to her. If you get through, just holler. Jessica Himes.
Hi, this is Jessica Himes. I am the budget director for the House of Representatives, and I assist the legislature in passing a state budget each year.
Welcome, Jessica. Troy Kilzer.
Good afternoon. I'm Troy Kilzer, Director of Chester County Schools. I'm fortunate to be a part of this robust group of leaders to help us learn and utilize TISA in a more appropriate fashion. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Troy. And Jeannie Phillips.
I'm Jeannie Phillips. I'm the Director of Schools for the Oneida Special School District, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this because TISA funding is vital for our school district. Thank you.
Welcome, Jeannie. And Bob Nardo.
Hi, I'm Bob Nard. I'm the director of Libertas. We run a couple of Montessori charter schools in Memphis. We serve the most students with disabilities of any charter school in the state. I also do a lot of advocacy on behalf of the Charter School Center in the sector, including having been on the previous TISA advisory committee when it was started. Thank you.
Welcome, Bob. Did Pam Jones ever be able to connect audio-wise?
No.
Is that Pam?
Yes, I'm Pam Jones, 11th Special School District. I'm the finance director.
Welcome, Pam. Well, again, thank every one of you for serving, and this is a very important committee, and I think that we'll learn a lot and make a major contribution to the state and to our students. This time, I would entertain a motion from many of the voting members to allow recording of our meetings this year to serve as the minutes for each meeting. Is there someone who would make that motion? Just speak up.
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Ben Torres moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Troy seconded. Okay, thank you. And Nathan, then will you please call the roll? Nathan, you're muted. Nathan, you're muted.
That
There you
sounds
go.
about right. Yes, Michelle Simcox.
Yes.
Let's see, David Connor,
Yes.
Ben Torres,
Yes.
Eddie Pruitt,
Yes.
Ron McPherson,
Yes.
Sarah Morrison,
Yes.
Crystal Nelson,
Yes.
Cliff Lippard,
Yes.
Marlon Davis,
Yes.
Chairman Eby,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Cobbins,
Yes.
Pam Jones,
Yes.
Gary Lilly,
Yes.
Jessica Himes.
Yes.
Is that an aye or an A?
Yes.
Okay. Troy Kilzer,
Yes.
Jeannie Phillips,
Yes.
and Bob Nardo.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the motion passes.
It passes. Thank you. This time I'd like to call on Mr. Todd Madison, our State Board of Education Deputy General Counsel, and he'll go through the statute that created this committee and the legal framework under which we'll operate. Mr. Madison.
All right, thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Todd Madison. I'm the Deputy General Counsel for the State Board of Education. Happy to get us started today. Wanted to kick off today's meeting by giving you an overview of the requirements of the Open Meetings Act, as well as the Public Records Act. But first off, would like to touch on what brings us all together today. Tennessee Code Annotated 49-3-113 establishes the TISA Review Committee, specifying its members and requiring the committee to meet at least 4 times a year to regularly review the TISA-based funding, weighted allocations, direct allocations, and outcome incentive dollars, as well as identify any needed revisions, additions, or deletions to the TISA. TISA Review Committee shall prepare an annual report on the TISA and shall provide the report on or before November 1 of each year to the Governor, the State Board of Education, the Finance, Ways and Means Committee of the Senate and House of Representatives, the Education Committee of the Senate, and the Education Administration Committee of the House of Representatives. The report must include recommendations on needed revisions, additions, and deletions to the TISA, as well as an analysis of instructional salary disparity among local education agencies, including an analysis of disparity in benefits and other compensation among local education agencies. All right, with that purpose in mind, it's important that the committee carries out its work in a way that is transparent and accessible to the public, which brings us to the Open Meetings Act and how it applies to the committee's work. The Tennessee General Assembly enacted the Open Meetings Act, commonly referred to as the Sunshine Law. The act requires that public policy in the state of Tennessee is public business and shall not be conducted in secret. All public meetings must be open to the public at all times, and adequate notice of the meeting must be given to the public. The public has the right to attend the meeting, but not necessarily a right to participate. The public comment period is required to allow members of the public an opportunity to comment on matters that are germane to the items on the agenda. Comments must be submitted at least 48 hours in advance, and germaneness is determined by the committee chair. However, in meetings where there are no actionable items on the agenda, such as our meeting today, a public comment period is not required. The Open Meetings Act applies to any governing body, which is defined as any public body which consists of 2 or more members with the authority to make decisions for or recommendations to a public body, policy, or administration. Because the TISA Review Committee was created by the General Assembly and has the power to make recommendations to public bodies regarding revisions to TISA, this committee is considered a public body that is subject to the Open Meetings Act. Under the Open Meetings Act, a meeting occurs whenever a public body convenes for one of 2 purposes: 1, to make a decision, or 2, to deliberate toward a decision. Tennessee courts have defined deliberation to mean to examine and consult in order to form an opinion or to weigh arguments for and against a proposed course of action. Therefore, it is not necessary that a decision be reached for the Open Meeting Act to apply. However, the Act does not apply to workshops or information sessions such as this. There are exceptions to the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. One notable exception is that chance meetings of 2 or more members are not considered violations of the Act. However, the statute goes on to warn that these chance meetings shall not be used to deliberate public business in circumvention of the law. Meaning if two committee members were to run into each other, they can talk with one another, but they can't spend time talking about revisions to TISA formulas. Likewise, courts have held that informal gatherings of a governing body at which public business is discussed and deliberated also falls under the Open Meetings Act, meaning committee members don't have to be within the confines of an official meeting for the act to apply. If there's a chance meeting of committee members and they begin discussing and deliberating public business, that would be considered a meeting under the act. In addition, members cannot use email or Google Docs to circumvent the requirements of the Open Meetings Act by deciding and deliberating public business via email or comments in a shared document. While members may need to send emails related to TISA formulas and the performance of their job duties, they should not send an email to committee members debating whether a specific formula should be recommended for revision. Actions taken in violation of the Act are considered void. Those actions can be cured via new and substantial reconsideration of the action in a public meeting. The committee is also subject to the Tennessee Public Records Act. This act states that public records shall at all times during business hours be opened for personal inspection by any citizen of the state unless the information is confidential under state law. There is a presumption of openness, and you are not allowed to destroy any records you create as part of your duties on the committee. A public record is defined as records created or received by local or state government officials as part of transacting official business. Official business for the purposes of this committee would be anything related to your review of TISA funding. Since you are all government employees, most of what you create will be subject to Public Records Act. Specific to your role as a member of this committee, anything related to TISA funding would be part of transacting official business and therefore subject to the Public Records Act. As you can see from the first element listed, public records can take many forms. Regardless of the form of the public record, it is still public and subject to disclosure. This extends to such records of government business conducted on personal devices. However, the Act only applies to the record itself and does not apply to the device it's stored on. If you ever receive a request related to TISA or have any questions about the topics we covered today, please let us know. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation. Thank you for your time and attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Madison. Any questions for Todd about the committees? No questions in. At this time, I'll call on Mr. Nathan James of our State Board staff to go through the norms of the committee and some of the history and lessons we learned from the BEP review days. I know many of you were on the BEP review committee. This is similar in a lot of ways, but TISA is different. So, Mr. James, I'll turn it over to you.
Happy to do that, and happy to to see everyone back again after a multi-year break that we've had as far as this goes. And what the chairman mentioned is accurate. When TISA was being put together, got a call from the folks in the Senate Education Committee and House Education Committee talking about the BEP Review Committee and asking if that should be included in the TISA language, and our answer was definitely yes, it should, because it provides it provides an outlet, a place where these things can be discussed, and frankly where public education funding can be appropriately influenced under the law. We do under the law, we'll have 4 meetings. That'll be generally in electronic format. And the main reason for that is if you look amongst your colleagues on this committee, you literally stretch from Memphis to Mountain City. And no appropriation is made to cover the expenses of members and their travel to come to Nashville. Doesn't mean it'll never happen. It certainly could if we decide to do that, but there's just no mechanism to cover the mileage and expenses for everyone. What we will do for instance, the other 3 meetings in this year is we'll do like we did for this one. We'll do surveys to get everybody's availability, and whichever time appears to have most folks available, that's when the meeting will be scheduled. We do have one difference that we need to make note of between this and the BEP committee is that there's legislation which has been signed by each speaker and not acted on yet by the governor, I believe, that allows us to have designees on this committee, but those designees are not permitted to vote. So you'll notice if you're a designee for one of the members of the committee, that your name was not called when we did our vote just a moment ago. Looking back through time, the BEP Review Committee existed during the whole time the BEP existed. And prior to 2016, I remember I served as designee for Senator Dolores Gresham when I worked for the Senate Education Committee. And I remember many meetings that went hour upon hour upon hour upon hour. And when I came to work for the State Board of Education, with that thought in my brain, I told Sarah, I said, I'll do anything you want me to, except for the BEP Review Committee. And but you know, we just changed some norms on it, and it became an incredibly effective tool to make things better for education in Tennessee. And one of the big changes was the creation of a priority list. So the way it would go from 2015 and on back was that the committee itself would never weigh in any official way until the 1st of November. Well, certainly the folks in finance and administration and other folks that are familiar with the state's budget cycle know that by the time the 1st of November comes around, the executive branch has already got most of the work for the proposed executive budget coming up the next year in the rearview mirror. So to come and make a recommendation at that point in time often was not efficacious. Let's just put it that way. So starting in 2016, one of the processes we did was we started doing a survey of each of the members where every member could list their top 5 priorities. And those 5 priorities were available in aggregate. Anybody could see the responses given, but whatever came up in folks' top 5 the most became the number 1 priority. Second most was second, and so on down to 5. With that, there were some really extraordinary wins, I would say. Times when requests were made. I always said that prior to that point in time, if you look at the old BEP reports from 2010, 11, 12, that if the committee had gotten everything that they had asked for back in those days, you would have had to have increased the sales tax by about a penny every year, because you're talking about $1 billion in new expenditures that would have been required for most years. And so naturally, that didn't make it into the budget. But when you take folks like you who know exactly what you're doing, are very invested in what the funding formula does on a daily basis, and you give them an opportunity to list out the top 5 things, matters of concern in real time, you can make some real progress. So we would take those, we'd send them over to Marianne Dursky and her team at the Office of Local Finance, and they would put together an analysis that would say, okay, if this one was funded, this is how much money it would be. And we started seeing the priorities of that committee placed into the executive budget. Also, frankly, when the TISA was created, it incorporated a great number of those items. I've got one of the old priority letters just so that members can see it. See if I can share my screen and we can show folks what we said in 2021. Oh. All right. Okay. And now, can everybody see this letter that we have up?
Yes, we have it, Nathan.
Okay, great. So what this does is go through and you see the date of August 30th. Well, chiming in August 30th is a whole lot better than chiming in November 1st when it comes to the creation of the executive budget. And on this case, the committee agreed we wanted to say thank you for the additional dollars put in for salaries, and to list number one priority that year was the funding the number of school nurses at a level closer to national best practices. Number 2 was school counselors the same way. Increased funding for response to intervention and instruction. And if I'm not mistaken, Marianne, that's one of the things that was included in the current formula. The continued commitment to increase teacher compensation and the increased funding for technology and accessibility. If you look at each of these, there's a small analysis done with them so that it lets folks who have the constitutional responsibility of appropriating dollars and proposing to the General Assembly what the state's budget ought to look like. It kind of breaks some of these things down into appropriate chunks. So you could say if you're going to do one portion, it would be 13.3 million. If you did it all, it was 26.6 million. And it was through this process that we were able to make some real progress. So let's see. Any questions so far? I know it can be a little daunting to speak up on some of these things, but I want to make sure.
If you have questions, raise your hand or just speak up, actually.
Now, I will say that we do have, we have a responsibility under House Bill 2485 to look at some analysis and the question of whether to include funding of from the Medicaid designation into some portions of the TISA formula. I'll get to that a little bit later. But other than that, there were no special bills passed this session tasking this committee with particular work. When we get closer to the end of our time together, which is generally right in the middle of October, we'll have a copy of the annual report and we will put that out. We'll have a meeting and go through and make edits to that and give it its final approval. For that one, we will need to make sure that we have a quorum of the principals, folks who can vote on that one where possible. So that gives you an update, kind of a snapshot of what's coming down the road. And that concludes my remarks on this matter.
Thank you, Mr. James. Are there any questions for Mr. James at this point in time? As he said, later today, we'll spend a few brief minutes people give an opportunity to say what's kind of your hot button or what you want to see us working on. But for right now, let's, if no questions, let's move on and call on Miss Mary Ann Dursky, the Chief Financial Officer for the Tennessee Department of Education. Mary Ann is an expert on all things TISA. We really rely heavily on her in school funding. We've asked her to give an overview of TISA for our members, and she'll be joined by Karen Burkholder, Director of Strategy for TDOE. So, Mary Ann, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Eby. Karen and I are glad to be here with you today. Karen is our co-expert on TISA, so we're delighted to have her join today. We're going to give an overview of TISA, and we're going to talk about several related funding areas that dovetail with TISA. So our agenda today will include an overview of the formula. We'll talk about local contribution, fast growth and infrastructure stipends. We'll touch on support funding, and then we have some resources to share with you. We have a number of resources in various formats on our website, and we'll give you some links to those should you wish to dive deeper into any of the areas that we talk about today. So let's start with our, I hope now familiar visual representation of the formula. This is the TISA pyramid. It's I think an accurate representation. It starts with the base and builds on top of that to include weighted funding, direct funding, and outcomes funding. And we'll touch on each one of those individually. As we talk about TISA, funding and average daily membership are intertwined. Funding is based on prior year membership or enrollment. We calculate enrollment or membership for each of the 9 20-day reporting periods in TISA. At the end of the year, we take those 9 ADMs for each of the 9 reporting periods and average them together, and that creates the base ADM, which is your overall district ADM. We calculate it for the population as a whole, and we calculate ADM also for each of the various subgroups that are funded through the TISA formula. So let's look at the base funding first. The base funding is what covers all of the basic educational needs for a school district. These are things like teachers, principals, counselors, maintenance and operations, transportation, materials and supplies, all of the things that kind of routinely go into a basic education. The base funding provides the same funding amount for every student, regardless of where that student lives, his or her economic status, his or her individual needs. Every student receives the base amount. As in the with the last 3 years, next year will include a $125 million investment for existing educator salaries. These are additional funds provided by the General Assembly that will allow all districts to meet the minimum requirement of a $50,000 minimum salary for next school year. That was in statute, part of Governor Lee's initiative. And as of July 1, every teacher in the state will make at least $50,000. For next fiscal year, the base is going to be $7,530. Some of these slides are still going to say proposed. They were created before the General Assembly adjourned. And so that has actually come into being. So 7530 is the new base for next year. On top of the base funding, we layer in weighted funding. This is where each student's individual needs are identified and addressed, and additional funding is provided so that districts are able to provide the supports that those students need to reach their potential. Weighted funding provides resources for economically disadvantaged students, students who live in concentrated poverty or in small or sparse districts, and for students with unique learning needs. And that includes students with disabilities, our English learners, and our students experiencing characteristics of dyslexia. The weighted funding is calculated as a percentage of the base. So each weight carries a percentage, and that's multiplied times the base amount. So looking at the individual weights, a small district is one with a membership of 1,000 or fewer students. This current school year, we have 22 districts identified as small districts. Each student in those small districts receives additional weighted funding of 5% of the base. Students are in a sparse district, is a county LEA with fewer than 25 students per square mile. This year, we have 84 districts who qualified as a sparse district. Only county districts are eligible for the sparse weight. And again, the sparse weight is 5% of the base. So every student in a sparse district would receive an additional 5% of the base funding.
Ms. Dursky, just
Yes.
clarification for people listening. So that's 84 districts out of, was it 147 in the state, or what?
There are currently 143 districts funded through TISA.
Okay, so 84 out of 143 are sparse.
Yes.
Thank you.
Concentrated poverty is an indicator that's attached to students who are in a school that is eligible for Title I school-wide designation. That means that they're in a school that has a poverty rate equal to or greater than 40%. The school doesn't have to be served by Title I funds. It just has to be eligible to be served. Students who are in a school identified as concentrated poverty generate an additional 5% of the base. So the weight for concentrated poverty is 5%. Economically disadvantaged. This has been, obviously, as many of you know, a topic of discussion for several years. Economically disadvantaged is defined as a student identified as experiencing homelessness, in foster care, an unaccompanied youth, or a student with migrant status, or a student who meets the direct certification eligibility guideline related to receiving SNAP or TANF benefits. I want to emphasize that students classified as Medicaid-free or Medicaid-reduced are not included in the economically disadvantaged definition, nor have they ever been. That is a designation that we are currently using, among other things, for providing free or reduced price lunches for these students, but they are not considered economically disadvantaged for TISA funding purposes. The economically disadvantaged weight is 25%. So every student in a school classified, every student classified as economically disadvantaged generates an additional 25% of the base as additional funding. For fiscal year 27, we are going to have an economically disadvantaged, or ED, hold harmless provision. Districts will generate TISA funds to cover 100% of the gap between the 2026 actual ED-ADM and the 24-25 funded ED-ADM. Many districts have seen a decrease this year versus last year, and this hold harmless will address that and provide additional funding to close the gap. If a district has more economically disadvantaged students this year than last, they will receive the higher amount. And so there are two examples here where District A last year had 50 ED students, this year 75. They will receive funding for their 75 students. District B had 200 ED students last year, only 125 this year. However, with the 100% hold harmless, they will receive funding for the full 200 students. And finally, in
Mary Ann, can I ask a quick question about? Can I ask a very quick question about that? And if you don't want to deal with it now, that's fine. If it's too in the weeds, obviously the General Assembly was discussing a broader kind of, it was termed in some places kind of hold harmless or relook at ED, but because of the fiscal note, it didn't move forward. It would be interesting to know how you're accomplishing or funding this internally structured hold harmless, maybe now or at another time if you'd rather, given that that was not approved. Thank you.
I believe that was factored into our ask when we requested TISA funding. So we do have the funds available in the budget this year. Anything else on ED? Okay. Unique learning needs or ULNs. The TISA rule defines the type of student ULN subgroups and then places them into levels 1 through 10. They are aligned to the higher levels of support necessary to meet students with these unique learning needs. As you can see from the table on the right, Unique Learning 1 generates a weight of 15% of the base. They kind of increase all the way through Unique Learning 10, which is 150% of the base. And those percentages reflect, again, the level of additional support that these students need in order to meet their potential.
Can you give an example, say, of typically what would be a level 1 or 2 and what might be a 9 or a 10?
Yes, level 1, for example, is special education option 1, which is students who are on a consultation. Unique learning need 2 is, I believe, Karen, you may have to help me here. I believe that is special education option 2. Karen,
Yeah.
Karen, can you help me?
Includes students with characteristics of dyslexia, and then our English language students who are tiered for needing less support because they've had more years of support already. When we're looking at the higher end of the spectrum, like ULNs 9 and 10, that's where we see students who need residential-based care and those types of needs.
Yeah, homebound, those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting in the chat. I can't do it to the whole group, but the state has a really nice 2-pager that lists examples of every single kind of ULN. Mr. Chairman, I just sent it to you if you want to send it to other people.
Yep, in the resource section of the presentation at the end too, we will direct everyone to the webpage that has lots of great supplemental resources.
Yep. Okay. And again, these percentages are applied to the base. So, for example, a student with ULN 8 in category ULN 8 would receive 100% of the base as additional, so they would generate twice the base amount. Students can have more than one ULN. They might be classified as an English learner and a student with disabilities, or they may have generate 2 ULNs based on special ed options. So a student can have more than one ULN. Okay. And so this is a little chart here, takes the ULNs and the all of the weights that we talked about and shows the weight category, the percentage of the weight, and then a brief description of what is in each of those ULNs. Just a handy reference if folks have questions on that. Okay.
Hi all, we're to the next layer of the pyramid, or direct funding. Direct funding in TISA supports programs that offer students learning opportunities beyond the typical everyday classroom instruction. The direct funding elements target funding to high priority educational areas, including additional funding for kindergarten through 3rd grade literacy, for 4th grade literacy supports, career and technical education, post-secondary assessment, and charter supports. Here you can see each of the direct funding lines and the funding amount currently generated for each direct funding line. So K3 literacy supports, for example, generates an additional $500 per K3 student. Direct funding is 100% state funded under TISA, so there is no local requirement for these funding elements. We're going to call out CTE funding because it's kind of a unique funding structure under TISA. Funding for CTE is tiered by course code that the student is participating, and it's based on two elements. It's based on the program of study level and the progression year through the program. The different programs of study are leveled every 3 years based on wage, demand, and skill data of aligned occupations, with the intent that those programs of study aligned with high paying, high demand, high skill occupations landing in level 3 and generating more funding under TISA. The progression years here represent the advanced status of the course, beginning with those introductory courses at year 1 and moving up to the more intensive learning experiences in year 4. The matrix here shows funding levels for 25-26, and we now can confirm that these are steady funding levels for 26-27 as well. The top layer of our TISA pyramid is the outcomes funding. Outcomes funding under TISA incentivizes achievement and educational excellence by awarding student-based bonuses when students demonstrate success in their educational careers. They acknowledge student academic success for early literacy in elementary school. They incentivize math and ELA excellence in middle school, and then some college and career readiness benchmarks in high school. So as mentioned, outcomes capture student-based performance indicators. Like direct funding, they are 100% state funding with no local contribution required. Outcomes funding is awarded once per school year, generally in December, based on outcomes from the prior school year. Students are eligible to generate 1 outcome bonus in elementary school, 1 in middle school, and 1 in high school. And then there's a separate committee, the TISA Outcome Committee, that makes recommendations for the TISA outcomes targets. That committee has a 3-year term, and a new group of that committee will be starting later this spring. Here you can see the current outcomes funding targets for elementary, middle, and high school. Do want to note that student bonus amounts are 10% of the base funding amount for the majority of students. Students identified as economically disadvantaged, English learners, or students with disabilities generate a higher bonus level of 20% of the base funding amount. So in elementary school, bonuses are awarded based on performance on the 3rd grade ELA TCAP. We either look at students meeting or exceeding expectations, or scoring below or approaching in 3rd grade and improving by at least 1 performance level on their 4th grade TCAP. So looking at both that achievement and growth metric. Middle school is similar, but it looks at both 8th grade ELA and math. TCAP, either the achievement measure or looking at increase in performance level from 7th to 8th grade in both ELA and math if the achievement metric is not met. For high school, we are looking at some college and career readiness indicators. There's a few different pathways to earn the high school outcomes funding bonus. The first is to earn 2 early post-secondary opportunity credits. We can think of those as things like passing an AP test or completing a dual enrollment course, and earning 21 or higher on the ACT, or scoring increasing a score of 4 points or more between an initial ACT attempt and a subsequent attempt. Or a student can earn 3 early post-secondary opportunity credits, or they can score a 31 or higher on the ASVAB assessment and earn 2 or more EPSO credits. Alternatively, there is an additional high school goal for students with disabilities who do not earn high school goal 1. For this second goal, students with a disability have to be attending a district that meets indicator 5 of the annual performance report, which indicates that 80% or more of students are attending a general education setting and meets two of three of the indicators listed here. So graduation with a general education diploma, proficiency on the state's alternate assessment, or the meeting of post-school outcomes such as employment or participation in post-secondary.
I have a question before we go on the outcomes. I've slept since then, but is there a cap on the total outcome fundings for the state, or if not, just what percent of our, and also what percent of our schools are meeting these outcome targets? You know?
So in all years we've provided outcomes, every school district has received some level of outcomes funding. We generally have an appropriation of 80 million per year for outcomes funding. The last 2 years, districts have generated more than $80 million in outcomes funding, but we have been able to cover that with additional funds available in TISA.
Okay, so that answers my question. There supposedly is a cap, but because we've had other funding, we haven't had to apply the cap and reduce the total funding for any school district because of that. Good.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
It is possible that we could have to apply a cap to the funding and prorate it down, but we have not had to thus far.
Okay, now we'll talk about local contribution, always a topic of interest, particularly to those of you involved directly in a school district or with local operations. Local contribution is governed by both Tennessee Code Annotated and State Board Rule. And it operates from the premise that education and education funding are shared responsibilities between the state and local governments. It is not 100% of either of those entities' responsibility, but rather a cooperative effort. So the TISA formula first calculates the total formula education dollars using the base, weights, and direct funding that we spoke about. And I will say that when we talk about a district's TISA allocation, we are always talking about the total allocation, meaning the state share and the required local share. So when we talk of a TISA allocation of $11 million, that is partially state and partially local. I just want to kind of set a norm on that. The local contribution calculation then kicks in and determines how much of the total TISA allocation will be provided by the state and how much will be provided by each local government across the state. So when we look at local contribution only applies to the base and weights section of the formula. Those two pieces of the calculation are shared between the state and the local government. The direct funding, as Karen mentioned, and the outcomes funding, those are 100% state funded. So we're going to look at just base and weights. Couple of key terms so that, again, we're all talking about the same thing. Local share is the set percentage of all funds statewide that are generated for the base and weights for which local governments are responsible, and that is 30%. So of the total TISA formula, 30% of that total formula will be paid by local governments. The remaining 70% will be paid by the state. Fiscal capacity, and we're going to hear more about that from Cliff shortly. Fiscal capacity uses CBER and TASR, both of whom provide us formulas to measure each county's ability to raise funds for education. So they each have a different way of measuring each county's ability to raise taxes for education. We take an average of those two measures, and that is the fiscal capacity that we use in the TISA formula. So it's an average of the two. When we talk about local contribution, that is the amount that each individual district is expected to receive from its local funding body. And it's often referred to as the required local contribution. A district must budget at least that much and expect to receive at least that much from its funding body in order to be eligible to receive the state portion of the formula. And then finally, maintenance of effort. Maintenance of effort kind of runs alongside TISA. That requires local funding bodies to budget at least the same or more in funds for education as in the immediately prior year. That has not changed under TISA at all. Maintenance of effort is still the same requirements as always. So it's a budget to budget test. You must budget at least the same amount of local revenue from one year to the next. The one exception being if you have a decline in ADM, you may reduce your local contribution as long as the local funding on a per pupil basis remains the same. So the state funds 70% of the statewide base and weights amount, and the remaining 30% is funded collectively by all of the districts in the state. So we multiply the base and weight amounts by 30%. We calculate them separately. We then apply the fiscal capacity of the county to the base and weights amounts, and that becomes the local contribution for that county. And so we have a little bit of a math exercise here, but you can see the two calculations running side by side. The statewide total for base in our example is 6.8 billion multiplied by 30%. The 2.055 billion is what all of the school districts collectively will contribute. Same thing on the weighted amount. We apply the 30% to the statewide total of weights, and we see 540 million is the local share statewide. The second part of that chart shows the application of a district's fiscal capacity. Sample County has a fiscal capacity of 0.75%. And so they are responsible of 0.75% of that 2 billion or 15,412,000. Same thing on the weights. Their fiscal capacity is applied to the total local statewide share of 540 million, and their share of that comes out to 4,050,000. Those two numbers added together become the required local contribution for this sample county. So about 19.5 million.
Marianne, can I ask a quick question about this?
Absolutely.
I was under the impression because TISA was like more funding overall than the BEP, I was under the impression that for a set number of years, the local contribution would be frozen. And am I correct about that? And if so, is that over?
No, Gary, the local contribution was never frozen. What we said when TISA was rolled out was that we did not expect to see the local contribution increase significantly, at least at the beginning, and then for some time after that. There was some concern that the local contribution would spike, and that was never in the calculations or in the projections, and it has not happened. Local contribution is going to increase as the overall TISA formula increases, because you're taking 30% of a larger number every year, but it has not increased dramatically. And to date, we have not seen any district that had to raise their local taxes or their local contribution to meet the requirement. Everyone has still been funded over the minimum required.
Great, thank you.
You're most welcome. Any other questions on that? I do want to emphasize that 70-30 split is not no district is going to have a 70-30 split. It doesn't work out that way. When we talk 70-30, we're talking statewide. So all of the districts, all 143 of you, are going to contribute the 30%, and the state will pick up the remaining 70%. So any other questions on that? I know that's always a concern, especially this time of year as we're looking at budgets. Okay, if not, we'll go on to fast growth.
All right, beyond the typical pyramid elements of TISA, there's a few additional provisions, one of them being fast growth stipends. Districts that have a TISA allocation increase of over 1.25% from year to year are eligible for a fast growth stipend. We calculate this based on a comparison between the district's actual TISA allocation based on prior year data versus a growth comparison allocation, which runs current year student data through the TISA formula. For this growth comparison, we're only looking at base, weights, and direct funding lines for non-virtual students. So students attending virtual schools are excluded out of this calculation for fast growth stipends. These are measured and paid out to districts at 5 points throughout the year, with a final payout at the end of the fiscal year in July. For the 25-26 school year, the state budget provides up to $60 million for fast growth stipends, with $5 million for infrastructure stipends. Infrastructure stipends are a subset of the fast growth funds that are designed to support districts that have sustained growth over a 3-year period. We pay out all fast growth stipends first, and then pay infrastructure stipends if there's any funding remaining. For the 25-26 school year, the state budget allows up to $5 million of the $60 million budgeted for fast growth spending to be used for infrastructure stipends. To calculate infrastructure stipends, we only look at base average daily membership of non-virtual students. We look at 3 years of data, and districts that have a 2% or greater increase over the 3 years are eligible for the stipend. In addition to fast growth funding, there are several funding support provisions through TISA. 3 key provisions that are designed to support financial predictability for districts. The first is the funding floor for 26-27. Any district whose 26-27 TISA allocation is less than their 25-26 TISA allocation, and they have experienced a decline in non-virtual base ADM, they qualify for the funding floor. The 2 other provisions are BEP transition and 5% safety net. BEP transition was designed to prevent districts from receiving less funds in the first year of TISA than they received under the BEP. I believe there were 7 districts that qualified for BEP transition funding the first year of TISA, and the support provision is designed to provide support funding for up to 4 years of gradual step-down funding to give those districts time to adjust to TISA allocations. Finally, there's the 5% safety debt, which would, that for any district that would experience more than a 5% decrease of funding from 1 year to the next qualifies for a safety net provision and will receive 95% of the funding from the prior year. This allows districts to start their budgeting process with a very low baseline or floor of 95% of their prior year allocation. There's no way they can go below 95% of the prior year allocation. Here is a funding floor example for initial qualification for the 26-27 school year. A district must have had both a decrease in total TISA allocation and a decrease in non-virtual base ADM. So in our sample district here, in 26-27, their TISA allocation run through the TISA calculator is 74 million. Their prior year allocation was 78 million. So we see the decrease in allocation, which is the first qualification. Their 25-26 non-virtual base ADM or student enrollment was 50,000, where 24-25 was at 51,000. So we see they met the second qualification of a decrease in non-virtual base ADM. This makes them eligible for the funding floor. which raises their TISA allocation back to their prior year allocation of 78 million. With the funding floor, that gap between the 74 million and the 78 million is covered in state funding. All right, I think that wraps up our overview of the TISA formula. As we have mentioned, there is a TISA website that has a multitude of resources that will be helpful for this committee. I encourage you to browse some of the resources available. The TISA guide is the go-to annual resource for districts to see any current year formula, data requirements, funding, budgets, etc. And then there are very helpful professional development sessions on a lot of the key elements of the formula. Most of them have videos, a slide deck, and a quick guide if you want to dive deeper into any of the provisions.
Thank you. Any further questions for Ms. Dursky or Ms. Burkholder?
May I ask a question? This is Troy Kills, Chester County.
Sure, Troy.
Thank you. Is there a list of those for that TISA, those who qualified for that last example that did receive that floor allocation?
So right now, no one has received funding floor yet. We in the monthly projections we're releasing shows whether your district is currently projected to qualify for funding floor for 26-27, but that will not become a final qualification until final data after June 16th. And so when final projections come out in July, that's when we'll have our official count of and district list of who qualifies for funding floor. We do see some districts qualifying and then not qualifying currently based on changes in their data as they're cleaning up data in the spring.
So based on what you're saying, there will be, at the July final, there will be a listing of who qualifies.
Yeah, I believe we will share that information publicly, yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
This is David
If
Connor.
none,
Will this slide
go ahead,
program
Chris.
be shared? Can this slide deck be shared, or is it available on that website?
We can make this available. We can send it to you, Bob, or to the state board, Nathan, and have it shared out.
Yeah, just send it to Nathan would be great, and then we can get it out. All the presenters, if that's okay.
Sure.
Any other questions? If not, then I'd like to call on Dr. Cliff Lippard, the Executive Director of the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, commonly called TASER, to give us a Fiscal Capacity 101. Dr. Lippard.
Thank you, Chairman. Are you seeing my main slide here? It was backwards earlier.
I'll just see you right now.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Oh, sorry. That's my fault. There we are.
Got it.
Very good. Sorry.
We see your slide and we see your next slide. I don't know if that
Okay,
makes a difference.
that's what it was doing earlier. Just 1 second. That's easy to fix. Okay.
There you go.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. And hard act to follow, Marianne and Karen. But for the Nathan asked me to prepare an overview of fiscal capacity, or Fiscal Capacity 101. So for the next 2 or 3 hours, we're going to go through the intricacies of just going to be a very, very brief overview. And some of it was already covered quite well by Marianne and Karen. Most of the information on this first slide of why we do fiscal capacity, which is to determine the potential ability of county areas to raise revenue to pay for education. The model is the state uses an average of our model, the TASER model, and the CBRA model. I'm mainly going to talk about the TASER model today, but I will also go over the basics of the CBRA model. Everything that's calculated here is county level. So all school systems within the county are treated as if they have the same fiscal capacity. And of course, these weights are not applied to direct and outcomes funding. These are the fiscal capacity only applies to the local contribution for the base and weighted funding components. So the TISA model, so we use a set of averages from actual tax bases, income, and the other variables to include actual revenue to determine weights using a multiple regression analysis to determine how much each of these factors contribute towards the potential fiscal capacity for a county area. And once we calculate those weights, they are multiplied by the factors for each county, comes up with a estimated potential local revenue for that county, and in that multiple regression equation, as I mentioned, actual revenue is used as the control. It's the dependent variable, and that's to cap it, if you will, so that the total fiscal capacity is not going to be more than what has been spent over the last 3 years on fiscal capacity. We do use 3-year averages for each of these factors, and that's partly to smooth out any disruptions from major changes in the sales tax base, for example. And let's go over the factors that are included in our regression equation, and those include own source revenue per student. As I mentioned, that is the dependent variable, and this is the actual money that's being raised at the county area for education, and again with 3-year average. So what they can actually do, what they've actually been doing. And then we have a couple of measures of the tax bases. We have a sales tax base per student factor we use, which is local taxable sales for the county area, and that's just divided by average daily membership. And it's again a measure to measures their ability to raise revenue. The other one is equalized property assessment per student. And so this is the total assessed property value for the county area. And it's equalized across the counties using appraisal to sales ratios. And this is just to account for different appraisal cycles. So that a county that hasn't appraised in a few years, it's to normalize their assessed values, make it more comparable to other counties. Now, I would mention that part of our equalized property value includes a very old measure of tax equivalency payments that paid by county areas. This is a figure that's not actually tracked anymore, and something that could potentially be changed in the model, and we'll get to that here in just a little bit. Some other factors include equalized residential and farm assessment divided by total equalized assessment. So we total the amount of residential and farm property, divide that into the total property value for the county area, and this is a measure, a proxy for the ability to export the tax burden. The idea being, the more business and industrial property there is in a county, the more potential there is for the county to collect part of their revenue from people outside the county. The higher this number, the lower the level of business activity, and the higher the risk of a heavier tax burden on county residents. Per capita income is a proxy for the county residents' ability to pay for education and for all other local revenue not accounted for by property or sales taxes. And then finally, there's a service responsibility variable, and this is measured by dividing the number of students in public schools by the entire population as reported by the U.S. Census Bureau. And this is to get at the service burden for the county area, how much they would be expected to, the taxpayers would be expected to pay to provide the education in the county area. The service responsibility, this has been a factor of some concern for a while. If we were doing the model from scratch today, we would probably not include this measure in the fiscal capacity formula. As Dr. Bill Fox always said, it really belongs on the other side of the equation, the spending side, rather than the capacity to raise revenue side. But as most of you know, whenever you change a model, there are winners and losers, and this is just has not been changed yet. It's something that could potentially be changed at some point in the future. A little bit about the effects that we would expect from each of these factors. So if your property tax in your county base, if your property tax base in your county area goes up, we would expect your fiscal capacity to increase, all else being equal. If your sales tax base increases, we would expect your fiscal capacity to go up. If your per capita income increases, we would expect your fiscal capacity to go up. Now, if your residential farm share of property goes up, that's when we would expect your fiscal capacity to decrease, all else being equal. And the same with service responsibility. The higher your service responsibility, the more we would expect your fiscal capacity to decrease. And I keep saying all else being equal because what you have to keep in mind is that the fiscal capacity is a statewide measure. So each county's index, each county's fiscal capacity is going to be affected by what's happening in other counties. So it's entirely possible and not uncommon for a county's sales tax base to increase, but their fiscal capacity to still go down because their sales tax might not be increasing as fast as all other county areas or the average county area increase, or other factors may be offsetting that increase. So just because your tax base goes up does not mean your fiscal capacity is necessarily going to increase your index value. So I said I'd briefly discuss the SEBRA model. This is the other half used in determining fiscal capacity, where we use a multiple regression equation to estimate the base. SEBRA uses a simpler algebraic model. They calculate a statewide average sales tax and a statewide average property tax rate, and they apply these rates to each county sales and property tax bases. They also use equalized property like we do, but instead of tax equivalency payments or TEPs, they use newer data provided by the comptroller's office that measures payments in lieu of taxes through industrial development boards. This is another potential modification we've talked about in the past on the old BEP review committee to our own model. They sum hypothetical sales and property tax base for each county, and then they use this to provide their to calculate their county fiscal capacity value divided by the statewide total, and that produces their index. And then that SEBRA model and our TASR model, as Marianne and Karen said, that is averaged to provide the fiscal capacity used in TISA. I mentioned a couple of potential refinements we've looked at over the years. People who have been on the BEP review committee will probably recognize several of these. One would be, like I said, replacing TEPs with the IDBs. Another, eliminating the service responsibility factor. And finally, adjusting or eliminating the virtual student count in ADM, which is becoming more and more of an issue. This is something that our own commission has looked at in the past, over the past year, the effect that virtual student counts are having on the model. And we also have additional information. For more information, you can go to our website and click the fiscal capacity program link at the bottom of our homepage, and it covers the frequently asked questions, our county level information, and a nice little resource tab, which is there's a screenshot here on the right where you can dig down into the more details on your own particular county of interest. And Mr. Chairman, I swear when I practiced that was 2 hours. I don't know why it didn't take as long, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Lippert. Any questions for Dr. Lippert?
I see Ron's got a question.
Yes, thanks. I want to make sure I understand. So we've always explained it to our.
I'm sorry, I lost you.
Yeah, we lost you, Ron. You're muted. I think you're muted if you're speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, you're muted. I don't know what the problem is. Can you type it in the chat? Well, let's move on. Any other questions at this point in time?
I see a couple there.
Okay.
David Connor?
Yep.
No, I didn't have a question.
Oh, your hand must be up from earlier then. I'm sorry.
think Bob Nardo maybe had a question.
Thank you. This has been very illuminating. I'm more knowledgeable about the student and school impact side of TISA and less about this. This has been very illuminating. One thing I'm still not quite sure on yet is the relative aspect, right? How changes kind of in, because it was described in one of the slides, either by Marianne's or yours, right? This is sort of relative to other counties in Tennessee. Could you elaborate on how that works mathematically?
Yeah, well, so it's an index of the statewide total fiscal capacity. So what we're calculating is what the statewide total is, and then each county has a share of that capacity, and so is the total is always going to be 100%. And so it's like when one county goes up, by definition, every other county has to go down a little bit in relation to that. So it can never push. As a matter of fact, we joked. Fiscal capacity nerds, we joke that this really should be called fiscal capacity 100 rather than 101, because you can't go above 100 with the index. But so it's you think about it as one part moves, the others have to adjust to reflect it. So it's how they play off of each other.
And then just one follow up to that, which is, I saw on Marianne's slide, right, like the multiplication of the local contribution by the fiscal capacity, right?
Right.
But could one of you just elaborate very slightly, so if a county is, if its local factors don't change, but statewide factors do change, right, and its capacity goes sort of up or down as a result, just explain for me, forgive me for asking this, what exactly that means for how their local contribution then changes. Like your local contribution could change due to factors actually not due to any specific changes in your county, but if the index changes, then your contribution payment will go up or down relative to that. And how does that interplay with their maintenance of effort, though?
And so basically, yes, it will. But this is what I believe Karen and Marion were talking about when they got into the floor and the maintenance of effort. So there's other factors that kind of mitigate that some, but generally speaking, yes, your fiscal capacity factors could not change, though they always do. There's always going to be changes, but hypothetically they could not change, but your fiscal capacity relative to everyone else's would still change.
Yeah, for the district-wide TISA allocation, when we get the new fiscal capacity numbers, what we see as a change in the actual district allocations is the state versus local breakdown, right? The overall allocation will not change, but the state versus local requirement will. So if your fiscal capacity has increased, we will see the state funding decrease and the local requirement increase, or vice versa. Interplay with maintenance of effort. I'll let Marianne jump in.
Yeah, the maintenance of effort would only be directly impacted by a change in the fiscal capacity if your required local contribution suddenly was greater than what the county or this district was actually budgeting. Typically, it does not have that effect, although we do have some districts where the required local contribution and their actual maintenance of effort amount, what they're actually putting in, are very close. And so we provide that information every time we do a projection, just so folks are aware. But yeah, you can see changes in your local contribution, perhaps not directly related to anything that happened in your county. The other thing that happens too is as we do different projections, the total statewide amounts are changing. They're not locked in until the very end of the year when we do our final data poll in June. Districts are still cleaning data, adding characteristics, changing characteristics and that sort of thing. And all of that changes the underlying gross calculation of TISA, which then affects that 70-30 split statewide and then trickles down into an individual district's.
Let me suggest this, because we're running up on the allotted time. Let's maybe have an example next time for the next meeting that kind of clarifies this question for everyone, if we could do that.
Sure.
Also, we've got a few more items on the list to go through. I know everybody's on very tight schedules. If you can stay on, I would highly appreciate you staying on until we finish, maybe in the next 15 or 20 minutes, but if you have to leave, I understand that. So
And I apologize too, Robert. I don't know. It's like I don't know if it's my volume or what. It's like went haywire. So anyway, I logged off.
It was only 2, I thought it was till 3.
Okay. Well, let's move on, and I'd like to recognize Mr. Nathan James on our team to bring up any potential priorities. We'll spend maybe 5 minutes going through the any major issues, priorities that people want to talk about. Again, we'll have a lot more time to discuss those, and we're going to be asking everybody to come up with their next 5 priorities. Nathan, do you want to add anything?
Yep, just to make it clear, I mean, we're going to get a survey out this summer to allow each and every one of you to put out your top 5 priorities. Those will be compiled and compared with those of your colleagues. Again, we'll get the Department of Education to put together the potential fiscal cost, and that will go into a letter that we send to the governor, Commissioner of Finance and Education. And also, we know that for our next meeting, we will need to consider the provisions of House Bill 2485, which requires us to review how economically disadvantaged students have been identified in the state in each of the immediate preceding 10 years, review how other states identify and fund economically disadvantaged students in public schools, and include in our report how the state may revise the ways in which it identifies economically disadvantaged students to ensure the state is accurately identifying the students in need of the additional resources and recommendations for how the state may better support economically disadvantaged students through TISA. My anticipation is that we will, in terms of getting the information from the other states, that will be a request we will make to the Education Commission of the states.
Thank you, Mr. James. I think I see a comment here by Bob Nardo. I think a survey is a good idea to rank possible priorities. I think we need a chance to discuss the ideas. Absolutely. We certainly will lengthen the time of the next meeting. Again, we recognize everybody's on tight schedules, but this is very important for us, for the state, that we make these recommendations and priorities and have ample time to have the discussions. Nathan, do you want to talk any more about the path forward and when we might meet again?
Absolutely, and please understand, it's once we've got the survey responses and so on like that, there is plenty of time to discuss as a body, and we go through and approve the top 5 list as far as that goes. The next meeting, we won't have to go through kind of the basics and the 101 that we went through this time. So we'll be able to concentrate on discussion time for individual priorities, as well as the discussion brought around by the passage of House Bill 2485. With that, I would say, from my perspective, just be ready to fill out a survey that tells us when you're available. I expect our next meeting will be close to the end of May, first part of June, and that'll depend on how many folks are available and when. So, any other questions or concerns?
Yeah. Any other questions or hot buttons that anybody wants to speak to right now before we adjourn? If none, I do appreciate the time. I appreciate your willingness to serve on this committee. Again, I think it's a very important, critical committee for our state. Taking the time to do this, we will certainly plan for more time next time. And with that, we will adjourn. Thank you.